I'm Lydia Hayes, a Professor of Employment Law at the University of Kent. With these videos for the Institute of Employment Rights, I'm going to share with you what I've learned by reading the manifestos of the political parties, looking for what they have to say on hot topics in the world of work. For many of us, paid work is a massive part of our lives, so what's in those manifestos? My first hot topic is 0 hours contracts. There are 1.8 million of these contracts which don't offer workers a minimum number of hours. Now, while some people say flexibility is good and it helps business, others point to problems for workers such as pay insecurity, hours insecurity, and insecurity of employment. It's also a problem that 0 hours contracts have come to be regarded as normal in some sectors of the economy, like care work and hospitality. So for workers in those sectors, it can be really hard to try and find a job which is not a 0 hours job. The Institute of Employment Rights has raised concerns that 0 hours contracts encourage short-term thinking by employers, and that this contributes to problems of low pay and low productivity in the economy. However, it's only Labour and the Lib Dems who have put forward new policies in their manifesto which are offering workers any additional protection. The Labour Party says it's going to offer workers greater certainty over pay, working time and job security. The manifesto promises that everybody in employment is going to get access to the full range of employment rights, and that would reduce the uncertainty that currently exists in our employment rights system, because workers who lack security of hours and income also tend to be workers who don't qualify for rights as employees, so this would change that. Labour also promises that these rights for everyone would apply from day one of employment. So this means presumably that they're going to get rid of all the qualifying periods for employment rights, so workers wouldn't any longer have to wait, say, 6 months for family-friendly rights, or 2 years even, for full unfair dismissal protection. Labour says it will also require employers to stop using 0 hours contracts and to replace them with contracts that set out a minimum number of paid hours for each worker. This is a clear declaration that 0 hours contracts are not acceptable within Labour's vision of the future. The way that flexibility will be maintained is to allow employers to offer additional hours over and above the contract guarantee. But I wondered, what prevents an employer from converting a 0 hours contract into a very small number of hours contract? And that's where Labour's right to a regular contract would kick in. It would ensure that contractual hours reflected the regular hours a worker has put in over the previous 12 weeks. My next question was whether a guarantee of paid hours would still leave people not knowing whether and when they would be required to do those hours. And it seems Labour has thought of this. They will require employers to give advance notice of shifts and to compensate workers if those shifts are cancelled at short notice. So, by my reckoning, Labour has taken a three-dimensional approach to improve security by ensuring 0 hours contracts become a thing of the past, replacing them with defined hours contracts and more secure contracts established through new rights. So the right to a regular contract, the right to advance notice of shifts and compensation for cancelled shifts, and access for everyone to the full range of employment rights from day one of employment. So these proposals represent significant change in relation to employment rights. Now, the Lib Dems are addressing 0 hours contracts from a different perspective or a different direction from Labour. They're not planning to stop the use of 0 hours contracts, but they say that they're going to make them fairer. Instead of increasing the security of work like Labour, the Lib Dems' proposals are to compensate the lowest paid workers for the effect of insecurity and to offer the right to request a fixed hours contract after 12 months. So Lib Dem commitments include the promise of a 20% higher minimum wage for people on 0 hours contracts. And this higher minimum wage would be to recognise that the uncertainty of fluctuating hours of work requires a degree of compensation. They are also offering 0 hours and agency workers the right to request a fixed hours contract after 12 months on the job, and that this right should not be unreasonably refused by employers. Now, both of those ideas from the Lib Dems have things to commend them. A higher minimum wage would make employers think twice about whether it might be better to offer workers a contract that is more secure. But by taking action only in respect of the bare minimum that can be paid, workers earning over and above this might ask what the policy offers them by way of greater security. It doesn't do anything to disrupt the use of 0 hours contracts as standard practice in some sectors. The Lib Dems are also recognising that 0 hours contracts shouldn't be used by employers on a long-term basis without good reason. And the idea of a right to request fixed hours after 12 months would be more sensible if the Lib Dems were also planning to improve unfair dismissal protection. Because if the result of this policy is that workers can be effectively dismissed after 11 and a half months service, it's not really helping to improve employment security at all. So while that right to request a fixed term contract is positive, it's not as strong as the right to a regular contract as put forward by Labour. The Conservative manifesto doesn't say anything on 0 hours contracts, but it reminds us that they introduced a law back in 2015 to make it so that exclusivity clauses in 0 hours contracts couldn't be enforced. That's true, but almost all experts will tell you that clauses preventing workers from doing more than one job wasn't a central problem for those who were concerned about the rise of 0 hours contracts across the economy. However, given that the Conservative manifesto doesn't say anything else about 0 hours contracts, it seems that their view is that they did enough 4 years ago and are not planning further change. The government, however, did consult back in July on the idea of providing compensation for cancelled shifts, but they don't mention this in the manifesto, and so there is no commitment about them taking this idea forward. The Lib Dems and Labour, however, their manifestos show they're both keen to encourage employers to think ahead, and that's likely to be because both parties recognise short-termism isn't good for the economy, that insecurity isn't good for workers, and that a goal of improving productivity requires stronger commitments and loyalties between workers and their employers. I hope that this video has been helpful and that you feel as though you know a lot more about 0 hours contracts as a hot topic issue in election manifestos.